Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into one of Aurelia 2's most powerful features, well, what I think is one of the most powerful features, synthetic views. So whether you're building dynamic UIs, integrating server-generated content, or creating highly customizable components, synthetic views offer unparalleled flexibility and control, as you're going to see as we progress through this video. So in this video, we're going to cover the basics of creating a view factory, instantiating views, and explore different ways to use these views, including how to attach them to a shadow root and more. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to do the boring stuff first, and then I promise you we're going to get into the fun stuff and do some coding. So what are synthetic views? You know, what do they do? So simply put, synthetic views allow you to create and manage views programmatically at runtime. So unlike views defined statically in your HTML templates, synthetic views give you full control over their creation, binding, and lifecycle management. So it's kind of like more of a functional approach, I guess you could say, to creating views as opposed to traditional way where you'd create a component with a view model and a view and then do it that way. So this is particularly useful when you need to render server-generated content with Aurelia bindings. So you could do that somewhat with Enhance as well, but obviously it's kind of synthetic views give you a little bit more control, so you get to dictate whether or not it gets displayed and etc. Dynamically create templates based on runtime data. You could integrate with a CMS or a third-party content. You could build complex, programmatically generated UIs. You know, the sky's the limit with synthetic views. So let's dive into the core concepts, and I promise you some code is coming soon. So a synthetic view in Aurelia 2 comprises several key components, but it's actually not as complicated as it sounds, as you'll see. So the first one is template creation. We have a dynamically created template element that contains the markup. So that could come from your server, it could be defined in your file, in a component, whatever. We have a render location, which is a marker in the DOM where Aurelia will render your view. We have a view factory, which is an object responsible for creating view instances from your template. So that's like the main engine, I guess, so to speak. Then you have a scope, which provides the binding context for your view. So it's essentially the data and methods it can access. And then lastly, we have the view instance, which is the actual view that gets rendered and managed. So understanding these pieces is crucial. They work together to let you create, render, and control views on the fly. But I promise you, once you do this once, it's quite easy to follow. It is actually pretty well documented in the docs now. This has been recently updated at the time this video was published to be even easier. But I guess understandably, some of you will learn more from a visual perspective. So hopefully this video provides that help. So now we're going to get into actual code. So we're going to create a synthetic view. So let's start by creating a simple synthetic view. We've got our code editor here. And I've got a scaffolded Aurelia app, which I use npx makes Aurelia to do. So all I did was type makes Aurelia. And then I chose TypeScript and Vite for the bundler. But that's it. Nothing fancy there. So here's how we're going to do it step by step. So we're going to create a separate component for this and then include it in our My App. And we're going to call this synthetic view example. Bit of a mouthful, but it tells us what it is. So we're just going to do the standard fare of creating a class. And we're going to call the custom element decorator on there. So we're just inlining this, but you could, of course, do it the other way and have a standalone HTML file. But for this instance, you'll see that we don't actually need to. So we're just going to create a template now, and we're going to have a div element with a ref in there and container. So now we've created that. We're actually going to import a few things that we're going to need for this. So we want custom element. We are also going to want iContainer because we're going to need a container instance. We're going to import a view factory. We want iPlatform, which is a platform abstraction, and the resolve function for including dependencies. So don't worry if you don't know what these don't do yet. You'll see shortly what we're using these for. Now, we also need to import a few things from the runtime HTML package. So that's convert to render location, custom element definition. Just clean up this AI generated eagerness here, which has caused a little bit of a mess. We want iCustom element controller and iSynthetic view. And lastly, we want scope. So these don't make a whole lot of sense to you right now. We did talk about these concepts, but we haven't actually explained them yet. So now that we've got all that, we're going to set up a few little things here. So firstly, our container, which is a div, and we've created a ref that's going to create a reference to that element. We're adding that to our class. We're going to add in a view, which is going to be our synthetic view instance. It's going to be optional because it's not going to be initialized, obviously. We're going to have our platform object, which is iPlatform. And we're also going to have, if I can spell it correctly, a DI container, which is an instance of iContainer. So that's just the dependency injection container, essentially. For platform, we're going to also go resolve platform. So this is using dependency injection to add these into our class here. Now there's a property, a magic property that gets added by Aurelia to components called controller and with a $ in front of it. So it's a read-only property, and it's an iCustom element controller instance. And of course we pass in the definition for it, which is this class here. So it's saying that this is an element controller instance of a synthetic view component. And that's all the properties that we need. So there's a few things there, but largely this is not related to the view factory creation. This is just kind of stuff that we need to do it. So for this example, we're going to use the attached lifecycle hook, and we're going to go straight into it. So I'm going to actually number these and go step 1, create a template element, and const template equals this platform. No, that's not right. Force a habit of tabbing, but it sometimes the AI autocomplete just gets a little too overzealous for me, and I find it really annoying actually. So we're using a template element because these elements don't get rendered by the browser. So they're the perfect kind of placeholder element to add stuff, dynamic content into a page. But you could actually use any element that you wanted to. So now we're going to set the inner HTML of our template, and we're going to add in some Aurelia markup in there and some HTML. So inside of that, we're going to have title, and then we're going to have a description or message, I should say. And then underneath that, we are also going to have a button, which is going to call the handle click method. And it's going to say, click me. Delete some of this overzealous AI stuff here. So we've got our template now, which is good. That's step 1 done. Now we're going to go on to step 2 and add the template to the DOM and create a render location. So now what we're doing here is we're going to get our container and we're going to append child. And we're going to go template. And then we are also going to create a render location, as the autocomplete has guessed correctly, to render location. And that is going to be our template that we just created. So we're basically saying this is a render location, and that's where Aurelia knows where to insert things. So that's step 2 done. Now, step 3 is where we start getting into the actual creation of the view factory. So create a view factory, const view factory equals new view factory. And for that, first argument there is, what do we call that? DI container. That's our container. And then secondly, this is going to be our custom element definition. Now you could create this separately above and then pass it in, but I'm actually going to create it in line. So custom element definition, create. This is creating a custom element. So the name, it doesn't actually matter. You could just call it anything. It's not going to matter. You can use actually the custom element API here to just generate a name, because as I say, it doesn't actually matter what you call it. And obviously template is template. That's step 3 done. So that's our view factory. This is where the magic is going to happen. So we're almost there now. Create a view instance and set its location. So we're going to store that in view and go create view factory dot create. We're going to pass it to the controller from the class, and then set location, of course, is our render location from above. So you can see the pattern here if you're following along. It's actually quite, I guess, nicely done, where you can kind of follow along quite easily. You know, and even though I guess the underlying concept of it is a little bit to it, the APIs for it are so good. So step 5, create a scope, which is the binding context, of course. And we're just going to make that a view model. And that's just going to be a standard object. So we're going to put a title in there and say something like, hello, synthetic view. And pedantically, we're going to make sure that's lowercase. And for the message, we're going to go, this is a dynamically created view or synthetic view. And then handle click, alert button clicked. Yeah, that works actually. Don't know if that's what I would have put. I probably would have done console log, but we've got our view model there now. Now step 6 is activate the view with the scope. So this is where the magic happens here. So we're going to go this.view.activate. And the first argument is going to be the view, which is the initiator. And then we're going to pass it in the controller. And then lastly, one of the most important things, scope, create, view model. So scope create essentially creates the binding context from this object, just obviously in the format that Aurelia expects. Now, when it comes to synthetic views, view factories and stuff, it's really good practice to clean up after yourself. So we're going to create a async detaching method, and step 7, deactivate the view when the component is detached. And then we'll check if we have a view, and then await this view deactivate. Now you have to pass in the initiator and the controller again. And that's pretty much, that's it. That's the kind of overall structure of, actually, one thing as well is scope is being imported from the wrong package. You can just import that from the Aurelia package by the looks of it. Okay, so we've got our synthetic view set up here now. And before we actually run it, let's just break down what's happening here. So we've got template creation. We create a template element and set its inner HTML to our dynamic content right here. So this could come from your server. It could come from anywhere. An API endpoint could come from a JSON file. Does not matter. And then we're doing the DOM integration. So we're appending this template to our container, and then we convert it to a render location. So this just tells Aurelia where to insert the view. Self-explanatory. And then for step 3, where it's a view factory creation. So we create a view factory and using the template, and the custom element definition create method defines a new custom element for our view. Like I say, the name does not matter, so you can call that whatever you want. Now for step 4, we create a view instance from the factory and we set its render location, all in this nice little builder pattern here, and we store it on this view property here so we can access it later. And step 5, we create a scope, or really it's step 6 we're doing that, but step 5, we create a view model object that contains the data and methods our view will use. And then further down, we use a scope with this view model and set it. Then the final step, in step 6, is view activation. So finally, we activate the view by calling view.activate, and we pass in the view, the controller, and the scope. So now whenever this component is attached to the DOM, it dynamically creates and renders this synthetic view. So what we're going to do is we're going to import this now. And we're just going to go import synthetic view example, and we're going to run it with npm start. And if we click this, you can see button clicked. There's a misspelling there as well. That's embarrassing. Anyway, you can, if we inspect this HTML here with this misspelling, you can see we've got synthetic view example, which is our component here. But interestingly, if you look in the template, all we passed in initially was this div. And then inside of it, that's the div there. And then inside of it, where the AU start is, that's where our template element was inserted. So happy days. That's a synthetic view. You can see it's actually rather simple, actually, once you break down the steps. And you could probably even make this a little bit more succinct and cleaner if you want. But for the purposes of a demo, I think it explains it quite well. Okay, so now we're going to go on and talk about understanding scopes and bindings, because it's a pretty crucial thing when working with synthetic views. So the scope provides the binding context for your view, which includes the data and methods it can access, as we learnt when we created the view model just down here. So we're going to show you how you can create a more complex scope with two-way bindings and event handlers. Now keep in mind, obviously this is subjective and you could do this your own way, but we're going to take this code that we've got here and just kind of expand upon it a little bit. So we're going to keep the title and we're going to get rid of the message this time. And we're going to put an input element in there instead. So input type equals text value.bind equals input value. And then we're also going to add in a paragraph here and put something to show you what you typed. So you typed input value. And then we're going to change this to submit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to change our view model to work with these new properties. So if we go down, we'll keep the title and We'll keep the handle click. We're going to replace the input value with an empty string for it to bind to. And then handle click is just going to alert what we submitted. So you submitted viewModal.input value. So if we go here, we can see that it's rendering our input and a U typed here. So if we start typing something, you can see it's syncing up. So the views here, as you can see, synthetic views act like actual Aurelia views. So they're really powerful in that you're not limited to static HTML here. So to break this down, in this example, we have an input field bound to the input value property, which is here in our view model, and a button that handles the handle click like we previously had. The value.bind ensures that the input value is updated both in the view and the scope, because input elements are two-way binding by default. And I think this demonstrates how you can use standard Aurelia binding syntax within synthetic views. You don't have to do anything different to work the way that you're used to working with Aurelia. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly fix that misspelling up there because it's driving me crazy. So we've got our synthetic view here and the typing mode. Okay, so now we're going to talk about attaching views to different targets. So synthetic views can be attached to different parts of the DOM, including the shadow root. So this allows for encapsulation and styling isolation. And I'm going to quickly show you how you can attach a synthetic view to a shadow root. So I'm going to change some of this code in here. And we've got a template element. So we're going to go up here and we're going to add some style in there. And it's going to be H1 color blue. That's good. And then H1, and then of course we're going to render a property. That looks good. Now we're going to create a ShadowDOM root. So const shadow root with open mode. That's perfect. And then we're going to, instead of attaching it to the container, shadow root append child. And then we're going to convert to a render location and do all the same stuff that we would do elsewise. And then go down to our view model, and we're going to change this to ShadowDOM view. Perfect. So we've created a shadow root in this example on our container element, and then we attach our synthetic view to it, and the styles defined in the template will be encapsulated within the ShadowDOM. Hopefully. So you can see that we've got a heading and it's blue, just like we asked it to be. And if we have a look in here, we can see it's created a shadow root in here. So we can actually test that is the case by adding a H1 element that says hello world, which should be a different color. So we can see that's a H1 element. It's not getting any of the styling that our H1 inside the shadow root is getting. So that's really cool. So you can create synthetic views, not just in Light DOM, but also in shadow root, ShadowDOM as well. So super powerful. You're not limited in that aspect. So now we're going to talk about dynamic updates and re-rendering. So there might be situations where you need to update the synthetic view dynamically based on some data changes. So say you have a bindable property and that changes and you want to re-render things, then you can do that. So we're going to show you how you can achieve that. We're going to go into our example here, and we're going to create a new method called update view. So async update view, and we'll call that new data. Then we're going to go if this view, we want to deactivate and dispose of the existing view first. So then we're going to set the view to undefined for good measure. And we're also going to set the container to an empty string, just to make sure everything's properly emptied out. So inside of here, we're going to, we want to create a template element. And then for the inner HTML, we're going to, and we're going to have a title in there. And then we're going to add in an unordered list. And we're going to use a repeat for item of items, item. Yep, that's correct. And then, of course, after we've done that, knowing from other steps, we want to append that template element. We're going to create a render location. We want to now create a view factory, which AI has graciously done for us. That's good. We don't care about the name once again. Then we're creating a view factory instance here and passing in the render location. And then lastly, we want to call activate and pass in the view as the initiator, the controller, and create a new scope with our data in there. So we want to go into the attach method now, and we want to turn that off. And for this, we're actually going to add in a bindable property. So for that, we're actually going to go items, and they will be basic strings. And just as a default, we're going to have apple, banana, cherry. That's good. And we also want to have a title. So synthetic view example, which is good. Now, inside of attached, we want to call that by default, and that should render our synthetic view. But then we also want to have a change callback on items changed. And we also want a title changed in there as well. And what we can do inside of apple, banana, cherry, we can go items.bind So that's a very poor example, because what we actually want to do is we've got items in here, and that's correct. We've got our default ones in there. We actually want to set a timer here, like a 10-second one or something. And we're going to set those to be these defaults in here. Because the component shouldn't actually care what we have in here. Mango, orange, pineapple. So we actually wanted to do like a set timeout just to kind of show this happening. So if we go in here and refresh, apple, banana, cherry, give it another couple of seconds, we can see that they've been updated. So that's happening because we've got a bindable property on this particular class here. And we've also got this change callback here as well. So you'll actually see if we call console log in there, that the items changed and we're getting mango, orange, pineapple. So as you can see, they're pretty flexible. You can use them kind of somewhat as components actually. So the update view deactivates and disposes of the existing view and then creates a new one with the updated data. So the important thing to remember here is to remember to manage the life cycle of your views properly to avoid memory leaks. So the really cool thing about synthetic views is we're kind of focusing on adding it inside of the component, but you could actually do something really cool here and not even worry about doing that. You could do something that, like say a modal is a really good example, where you want to attach it to the body. So we're going to do that now, just to show you how cool this is, because this is where the power of synthetic views really shines, in my opinion. We're going to create a method called open modal. And that's going to be a string. And we're going to get rid of this deletion, deactivation logic in here. So first thing that we do is we create a template element. Now inside of that, we're going to create our modal functionality. So that's going to be modal overlay. And then modal content, yep. We're not going to worry about a title in there, just the content, and we're not going to wrap that in anything either. And make sure we escape that. And then we want to add in a close button as well. So now we've got a close button, and that's our little template there. It's all looking good. Now, before we were adding something onto the container, what we're going to do here instead is we're actually going to attach this to the body. So we're going to go platform.document.body append child template. So this is going to be outside of our Aurelia app, and it's still going to work exactly the same. Similar to how the portal element works, if you've used the portal element, where you can portal to things like the body and stuff. Technically not inside of an Aurelia app, but being managed like an Aurelia app. So we've got all this here. This can all stay in that. That's all good. Now we're going to go down here and create a view model. So const view model. Going to have content, of course, and then a close function, which is going to call this .view.deactivate, where we pass in the view, and of course the controller. And then we're going to call template.remove. And then on the activate method, we're going to scope create view model. So in this modal example, we create a synthetic view for modal content and then append it directly to the document body. And this modal can access methods like close defined in its scope. So now what we can do is we can actually go into our app, open modal, and we'll get rid of this now. We can clear this container out, and we can just have an independent button that says hello world. So just a simple little thing here. You can see there's nothing on our body just yet, just the my app element. Now watch this. It's added it to the body of our page. And then if we click close, we can see that it's disappeared. If we click open, we can see it's come back. It's pretty damn cool. So what this is doing is we're programmatically adding the element to the bottom of the body there. And obviously the styling and whatnot is incorrect, but you can see you can pretty much add a synthetic view wherever you want. It's a really cool feature, very powerful, very cool. So Let's get into best practices for synthetic views now. We've gone over a few examples. So just before we wrap up, I just want to go over some best practices when working with synthetic views and stuff that it's just common sense and stuff that we've already shown you. So the first one is always properly activate and deactivate your views to manage resources effectively. You don't want any nasty like memory leaks or anything like that, or polluting your DOM with stuff you're not using. Scope isolation. So be mindful of the scope you're providing to your synthetic views, and decide what it should have. Should it be able to access the parent scope, or should it have an isolated scope? In most instances, you probably want an isolated scope just because it keeps things cleaner. Probably you want better error handling as well. So wrap your activation and deactivation calls in try catch blocks or handle promises to catch any errors. We didn't do that in our examples, but it's just good kind of best practice to do that. And lastly, you want to make sure you clean up. So dispose of your views when they're no longer needed to prevent memory leaks, which we spoke about at the start. And if you've worked with any other of the Aurelia lifecycle APIs or the event aggregator or anything like that, or events, it's just good practice to remove event listeners and all that kind of stuff. So following these practices will help you maintain clean and efficient code when working in synthetic views. So that's the end. That's our deep dive into synthetic views in Aurelia 2. So you can see there's a bit to it, but it's pretty much the docs explain what you need to do quite well, and a lot of the concepts just carry over regardless if you're working in ShadowDOM or LightDOM or whatever. We've covered how to create them, how to manage their life cycle, attach them to different parts of the DOM, and we even built some dynamic uses of it as practical examples. So synthetic views are incredibly powerful for building dynamic and flexible applications, and I encourage you to experiment with them in your projects as well, because they have a lot of utility, especially if you're a plugin developer. If you're creating stuff that's dynamically adding to the page, as a plugin developer especially, super powerful. So if you found this video helpful, or you had any questions or anything like that, leave a comment down the bottom. And if you have any recommendations or suggestions for future topics, we're all ears. This is for the community, so we want to create content that you want to see, not just content for the sake of content. So please don't be shy and let us know if there's something that you really want to know about Aurelia, and we'd love to do a deep dive video for you. So thanks for watching, and happy coding.